Thank you, Madam Chair. The first item, item 1, concerns the minutes of this committee's meeting held Monday, June 14th, and the recommendations to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 2 is a report concerning the industrial zoning review. We have an introduction by Mr. Jim McIntyre, General Manager of Planning and Development, followed by a presentation by Eric Vance, Consultant. There's a series of 3 recommendations: to receive the report as an update, to ask Council to support in principle the creation of 3 new industrial zones, and 3, that staff identify all the properties that would be affected by this amendment and report the results back to Council.
Okay, do I have a mover? I'll move. I'll second for discussion. For discussion? Okay. Mr. McIntyre, did you have some way you wanted to proceed, or can we just jump right in?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and if the committee will permit, I'd like to offer a few opening remarks about this report. And we do have the consultant that assisted us on this project here, and he was going to give just a brief overview of the report, if we could. Just take a few minutes. First, very pleased and proud, too, to be bringing this report forward today. It's a fairly dramatic overhaul of our industrial zones, going from 9 down to 3, and that's a big step, but we think it's, in this case, it has merit as opposed to taking a number of many smaller steps towards that. This is part also of our ongoing development improvement process, because the zoning bylaw is one of the key tools that we use for considering and processing development applications, and whereby we can improve that tool, simplify and make clear the zoning bylaw. It helps for property owners, businesses, prospective applicants, and for staff, and ultimately for committee and council. So we see it as a good step in the right direction there. The origins of this initiative, it was something that was pointed out in the strategic land, or the industrial land strategy a couple of years back. It was certainly something we had on our to-do list. We found that the industrial zones were just really cumbersome. There was confusion. There were some cases where there's a single property zone for one zone. That was it. That was all. So it was timely for a review and updating of that. So through that process, there was extensive consultation with the industrial business community, with the Urban Development Institute, with the actually industrial subcommittee of the UDI, with NAIOP, local commercial realtors and the like. And leading that process was a consultant we brought on to assist us with that work, and that's Eric Vance. And he's done some other consulting work for the city as well. What we want to do now is bring this forward, because as I said, it is a significant change, and we are looking for the committee's support for that and council's endorsement before we move forward to the next stages, which we call for a lot more area-specific analysis. But we want to make sure we're at the right spot now, that the committee and council are comfortable with that before we go forward. Recognizing there may be a number of questions. This is a big leap. There may be a lot of questions around that, and that's fine. Let's get that on the table, and we'll try to address that. And in a time, what we'd like to do is, once council does support this, is then move on out, consult with the property owners, the businesses, residents around those industrial areas, and make sure that they have their opportunity to get involved into that process. So with those brief remarks, Madam Chair, if I could, I'd like to introduce Eric Vance. Eric is a planner. He's a consultant that's done some other work for the city, and if we could, I'd like to just give a brief overview of the report.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. Mr. McIntyre's covered off sort of the context behind this. Without boring anybody too much, I just wanted to get into a little bit of the detail on the 3 industrial zones that are being proposed and sort of the rationale for how we got to where we are today, which is still very much a work in progress, and no question there'll be a number of issues that this committee and others want to raise as the process proceeds. But in looking at the situation, it became clear fairly quickly it wasn't a matter of taking the 9 zones and trying to merge a few together. It was much more complex than that. So we stepped back and we said, all right, if we were trying to create zones from scratch, what kind of zones does Coquitlam need, taking into consideration what the market wants, the economy, what the official community plan says, what we're hearing from property owners, and so on. So we started with a clean slate. We didn't take the existing zones and try and play with them. And it was through that we came up with the 3 zones that are being proposed. The first zone being the M1, or General Industrial Zone, which would be your more traditional industrial zone that would allow for both indoor and outdoor storage and production activities. And we would envision that zone being applied to industrial properties that are not in high-profile locations, that are not adjacent to residential because of noise and other potential impacts. Moving to the M2 industrial business zone, the key difference between the M1 general industrial zone and the M2 zone is that the M2 does not allow outdoor storage or production activity. That is the key difference. And that's something we noted in looking at the zones of a number of other municipalities in the mainland. And a good example is in Richmond, for example, where they have a fair share of the lower mainland's high technology industries. And yet when you look at the zone where those high-tech businesses are located, there's nothing special about it. It's not a high-tech zone. It's a general light industrial zone that allows a broad range of uses. But the key thing is those uses, no matter what they are, all have to be enclosed. And so that was one of the key differences between the M1 and the M2. We also are proposing that the M2 zone allows certain types of commercial recreation uses, because as this committee knows, there's been increased demand for that. And there's a few other things as well that we're proposing be allowed in the M2 that aren't in the M1. The M3 largely evolved out of discussions as to what we're going to do with some of the big box retail properties along United Boulevard, which, as council knows, or this committee and council knows, is they're big box retail. They're called industrial retail, but they really aren't industrial in any way, shape, or form. They're retail uses, and the thought of that going back into traditional industrial use simply wasn't going to happen. You don't move backwards like that. So if it couldn't be industrial, what was the appropriate use for it? And that's when we decided, and it's a recommendation, that general office use should be allowed on a certain number of properties right on United Boulevard, as well as some other uses. We talked a little bit about restaurants in there. We recognize there's a demand for more restaurant or food facilities down in the industrial area. We agree with that, but our concern is not opening the door to allow standalone restaurants all over the place, or we'll be moving even further away from what we believe the vision should be for that area. So we're allowing or suggesting that restaurants be allowed, but only as a secondary use in certain situations. The use issues aside, the other thing is we've recommended fairly radical overhaul of the density and related provisions. We're recommending that the density be opened up, that there be more flexibility shown there. There will still be controls, but there'll be different kinds of controls than are currently in place. So what we're really bottom line doing here is suggesting that industrial businesses be given greater flexibility in both uses and density. We recognize, however, that in applying these zones, and we'll be reporting back on this, that there will be certain properties that become non-conforming as a result. That's inevitable. That typically happens when you're dealing with large-scale rezonings like we're proposing here. There's nothing that says that those businesses can't continue to operate, but they will become non-conforming, and we will well expect that there'll be non-conforming situations in some of those properties probably for decades, and that's okay, but eventually they'll evolve into the uses that we feel are appropriate for the long term. Okay. That's all I wanted to say right now. I'll sit down and
Thank you.
entertain
I think
questions.
We all have a bunch of questions, so maybe you can keep your pencil rapidly busy. Okay, I asked my two colleagues if I could jump in on this one first, because this is of great interest to me. We've had a meeting beforehand to discuss some of the things in here, and there's a couple of really big items, and then I know my fellow councillors have lots to say about it. The first one, of course, I'm really happy to get this. I don't know if the creation of 3 new industrial zones is the right number. it certainly shouldn't be 9. And as I explained to Mr. McIntyre, when we first brought M9 on, we kept getting applications over the years, and they kept coming in and they never fit anywhere. So we made M9, which seemed to fit everything, only it's now like the kitchen drawer that if you can't find anything in the house, you go to the one drawer because everything will be in there, and that's what M9 became, the kitchen drawer, so you found almost anything in there. One of the big concerns I have about this is the BC Assessment Authority. And we are going to take a wholesale look at all of these zones, and they're going to be upgraded or downgraded. And we don't assess them. BC Assessment Authority does. So before we go out to any of the public, and I had suggested that we go out with a questionnaire to everyone in the area, asking them very pointed questions that I think we can all get together and put out. But the first thing people are going to ask is, how is this going to affect me? And when they say, how is it going to affect me, it means how much is it going to cost me? When I get rezoned, am I going to be worth more? Is my land going to be worth more? Is it going to be worth less? So one of the things that we discussed was getting in touch with the Assessment Authority first and taking a look at their classifications. Now, they zone not only on what the zoning of the land is, but also on the use. So I think we need to take those into consideration before we go and start putting things into different categories so that we can sort of help people to stay in the same assessment area that they were. I don't know that we're ready to go out yet. So I guess I'm going to let everyone else speak too, but there are a couple of zones. We have one zone in our city, which is a cabaret zone, and we have one cabaret. And I think in here you mentioned somewhere that there was a crematorium that was in the industrial idea. And I think always we can have 3 zones, but I think there has to be some special place, like a new kitchen drawer, that these very oddities can fit into in the industrial zone, as in the commercial or any other zone. So I will leave that one alone. We're looking here for film studios, and I know the mayor would love to see a film studio, and I just hope that one eventually comes. Disneyland North would be fine. I'd certainly find room for them. And Mickey Mouse can even come and sit with us here at council. That could be quite enjoyable. But I do not... recognize him. Pardon? Yes, Pluto? Yes. I guess there is a strong demand for commercial recreation space in Coquitlam. And I know that, and we have had many people come forward trying to put different kinds of recreational things in. Now, I think this can be a plus or a minus, and mostly when we're dealing in an industrial area with large trucks, little children, and traffic, it's not a plus. It definitely isn't. So I think that's one question that has to go out to everybody in all these, the whole southwest area that we're talking about, the United Boulevard industrial area, as well as along Barnett. And I also think this has to be referred to Leisure and Parks for their comments. I just don't think it is the right place, unless we have one particular location that you want to make it the right place, like one specific area between Smith and Jones and Street or something. Maybe that's what we need to do. One of the biggies for me is office use. I want to see, right now we have office use in industrial areas. We allow 25% for office space if you buy a big strata warehouse or some kind of another warehouse. And I can tell you in my business that's not enough office space. You need more office space than that. And I spoke to planning about that this morning. I think the office space that's needed, or sales space also that's needed in an industrial zone, I think we have to look at that. But office space has to be has to be much more than that. And I think office space in that area, that's the kind of office space we want in there. I do not want to see a big office space down there, because we have Fraser Mills coming on as well, and they will have some kind of office space for doctors and dentists and things like that. And I think that's a more appropriate place than putting office buildings right into the mix of industrial. The lot size, I'm concerned about the parking requirements, but I think those are things that we can go over with staff. The restaurants, I do feel that we can have some more restaurants down there, and I don't necessarily think they all have to be drive-throughs. So whatever zone that would go in, I think you're looking at M3, and I like that. Accessory retail use, which is the one I just spoke to, I think it needs to have a significant percentage of land or of space so that they can actually use it, make it useful, not make it just so tiny that it becomes useless. Trade schools, I love to see that down there. The biggest thing that comes up and down to me is the values and how our citizens are going to be treated when we change the zones. Hence, I want to do the explorations with the assessment authority, and I want to take time, and I don't mind doing this personally with you, to sit down and look at how these are going to relate to where the zonings are changing, because that's a real biggie for everyone. And last but not least is something that Mr. Steblin, bless his heart, reminded me of when I came in, which is the relationship of our recategorizing our industrial lands to what's happening with this Metro Vancouver Draft Regional Growth Strategy. And here we go. This is the classic example of what we've been talking about when we try to include all the lands that we can within our, what they call urban containment, which is a terrible name for it. But when we're trying to, Mr. Steblin just mentioned, I'll let him explain it better, but last week we approved a new restaurant in the industrial zone, and had this new regional growth strategy been in, we wouldn't have been able to do that. That would have been up to a total other body trying to decide what businesses we want in our city, and that to me is totally unacceptable. So, Mr. Steblin, if you just want to comment on that one, and then everyone else is going to take their turns.
I asked Jim McIntyre to specifically add a reference to the regional growth strategy so that it would just be flagged as an example. That paragraph is included at the top of page 10. But in summary, at the present time, how we zone our industrial lands, rezone them, or categorize them is solely up to this council. Under the new regional growth strategy that is being discussed at the regional level, that is one of the issues that Metro Vancouver is talking about pulling under their purview. So anything after that is approved, anything that we seek to do in the industrial lands would need Metro Vancouver approval as well as the council approval. I just wanted to highlight that to make that regional growth strategy real, because one of my concerns is that across the region, many councils don't fully grasp that, exactly what it means in terms of the disposition of authority at what level. So I just thought I would highlight that.
No, I thank you for that, because that's what happened with the Westwood Plateau area, and I do not want to see that happen to the city of Coquitlam. So Councillor Reamer, then Councillor Robinson, then Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. I fully support this, and I want to thank staff very much for bringing this forward. This is going to increase our flexibility in the service we provide to our investors and our citizens. So from that perspective, I fully support it. Going from 9 down to 3, I think is a great thing. And I have one question, and it stems as a result of inquiries that we've had from several of our businesses down in the United Boulevard area, and that is the question of amenities. I don't see amenities covered within this report. However, I suspect that when you go to redesignate the properties, you may see some opportunities, for instance, to have a convenience store or to have a service station in the area. Is that a correct assumption?
Through the chair, yes, we've looked at this in a couple of different ways. We do provide for, one amenity is eating establishments, restaurants and the like. And so there's those that we provided allowed within the industrial zones up to a certain scale, and that makes sense. You see them down there right now, the little sandwich cafes and that sort of thing. As well, we recognize that there's an interest for a larger establishment. There's that Tim Hortons down there, it's very, very busy, and Wendy's, but others along that corridor to provide that amenity, that service to.
I actually wasn't referring to those types of amenities. I was referring to things such as convenience stores and service stations.
Service stations. I think what we look at there is it would be the same approach as what we're proposing for the restaurants, that there may be opportunity and need for them down there, but they would be considered on a case-by-case, site-specific rezoning basis. And if there was good merit for it, then that application could go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have is, I would like to put this forward or through as quickly as we can get it through. So Councillor Reid has addressed some very valid concerns, and I would think that before you do your property identification, or during that process of doing number 3, recommendation number 3 here, that you will also be able to address her concerns so that we're not really holding things up. Is that...
Through the chair, Councillor Reid did raise a number of very good questions around how BC Assessment Authority would view these changes. And certainly we can have those conversations with the Assessment Authority. We can show them the proposed zones that we're thinking of. But it also gets to a point they need to know which properties, which zones. And so now we're getting to that sort of that mapping exercise. And I think we as a work group have some ideas in mind, but we haven't actually put specific lines to a map. But I think hopefully there is support from the committee to move forward to council. That would be one of the first things we would do, is have those discussions with BC Assessment Authority. And maybe we could have an early report back to committee and council on that. At the same time, we wouldn't want to lose momentum on doing some of the other work, because it is quite extensive.
Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Robin.
Thank you. I too am pleased to see this. It actually speaks to the notice of motion that Councillor Reamer put forward around getting rid of bureaucracy. I think going down to 3 certainly, I think, helps a whole lot around some of that bureaucratic stuff that we get stuck in. And I'm always fascinated about how things get complicated in the first place, and want to make sure that we don't make things more complicated as time goes on. So for moving to a simple model, are there things in place to ensure that we don't creep up to 9 zones again? Like I'd hate for in 15 years from now to wind up with 9 zones and be back at square one. So are there things in place that we can do to make sure that we don't get caught in that again?
Through the chair, that's a real good crystal ball gazing question. And I guess what we tried to do was, when we approached this exercise, as Eric said, forget what we have on the books right now. We know we have a handful. We have a bit of a mess. What logically makes sense? And we obviously wanted to get the number of zones down, and we thought, well, let's at least start with 3, and we may need to add 1 zone, or there's other means of coming up with site-specific special conditions I can speak to in a minute. At the end of the day, it's committee and council's will. If 3 feels good and that's what works, let's go with that. If we need 1 more, fair enough. Over time, who knows? Often, in the course of year after year, issues come up. Issues arise, and there's a situation, a solution at that time, and the council of the day feels that's appropriate to put in place. So
they can deal with it. Okay, so I have a couple of more specific concerns. I too am concerned about the idea of small grocers. I worked down in there for 5 years, and in the report it talks about the availability of restaurants on the other side of the highway, which I guess when you're working and you only have 45 minutes for lunch and you have to get into your car, get through the traffic, cross the highway, find parking, order a meal, it's just not pragmatic. So even though they look like they're close, they're not close. You can't walk there. You certainly aren't going to cycle there. And even taking a car is a barrier. So I appreciate that it looks like they're close, but the barrier about, I know that we won't have to cross train tracks at some point, but still, it's certainly crossing the highway. It's not practical. And so I am a little concerned about the fact that we're saying, well, we're not going to have restaurants. There's a lot of people, the idea is to have a lot of people working down there, and they need to have a place to eat. They need to have a place to pick up milk for the coffee, because when you run out of milk for the coffee, you have a lot of grumpy people wandering around your workplace, and no one feels like getting into the car to go to Superstore, which is the closest, to get the coffee, because they disappear for hours in Superstore. So I do think it's important that we do have some local amenities. If we're going to be building some density down there and increased working, I think it's important that we consider more of that. Commercial recreation, I think, should be an M3 only, actually. I'm not crazy about it being M2 and M3 for similar reasons around kids and traffic and big vehicles and all that kind of stuff. And I think that, where we have this retail-ish sort of place, that might be a better mix than next to the cement plant kind of thing. So I'd like to see that sort of just drilled down a little bit more. I do like the parking suggestions in terms of how we determine parking needs, that it's more important to consider what it's being used for than how big the lot is. I think that that makes a whole lot of sense. What I'm curious about are just like my colleagues here, it's great when we all think the same thing, because I'm worried about these changes will further increase land values, and so is one of the things that we're predicting, and it's sort of like by how much and what's tolerable, and how do we find out by how much. So I'm really glad to see that Councillor Reid has had that conversation. So what I'd like to know a little bit more about is sort of what's the timeline. So we talk with BC Assessment over the summer, it comes back to us with that information. Like, I'm just wanting to get a sense of, what are the next few steps, and then when would it come back together? Because I don't want it to get bogged down either, but I also want to make sure that we do this right, and we make sure that we have all the information that we need in order to make a good decision about how to help with our industrial zone. So, I'm fine to move this on to council, but when it does come to council, I think it would be helpful to have we're going to do these 4 things, and you're going to see it back again in a different iteration by the end of the year, or whatever it is, but just something real specific.
I guess I'm going to jump in here for a minute, because we had this conversation quite extensively about the assessment authority. The assessment authority is by the province, as you know, but they have different classifications, and I don't know how many they'd have for industrial. It could be 20, it could be 10, whatever. All that will do is help us lump in where we want to lump in, so it shouldn't be a long process. It should be pretty concise. So, Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate the questions and feedback. This is very helpful. That is a really critical question. And actually, I can think years back, Eric and I were doing a similar exercise in Port Moody. We had discussions with BC Assessment Authority, and it is a little bit of a murky business, but we need to go there and find that out. And yes, we do want to move forward with this expeditiously. I think, in all honesty, we probably won't be able to report back before the August break. But if with the committee's support and council support, we will get moving on it. And maybe what we can do is target coming back as soon as we can in September with an update, focus on the BC assessment feedback, and really lay out in more detail a process going forward from there. And in that, there'd be communication and consultation, and where these areas might sort of land. And if I could, Madam Chair, and Pete spoke to this about the relationship between the proposed zoning bylaw amendments and the Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy. And there's a little bit of good news to report there. With the first version of the RGS, it was pretty restrictive. This would have been not possible, or it would have been problematic, as I said. They have backed off a bit. They've made some changes. It's not just industrial anymore. There's mixed employment. There's a little more leeway, a little more latitude. And more recently, this working group that I have the pleasure of chairing, we have been pushing for more flexibility. So things like the Big O restaurant that went through down there would be permitted in the mixed employment zone. Other restaurants or service stations or convenience stores, those sorts of things would be allowed in those areas. So the municipal staff from around the region have been kind of pushing back a little bit, working with Metro Van staff, saying, here's what we need out there to make this acceptable. So at this point in time, my take is that the emerging draft RGS is still kind of a work in progress, is consistent. What we're coming forward with today would be consistent and supportable under that. So.
Good. Thank you very much. Mayor Stewart.
Thank you very much. No, I'm glad that it does sound like there's some unanimity here that these are good changes, these are appropriate changes. I just want to make one minor adjustment here. The Big O is a tire store. Triple O is a restaurant. And they're both around. They both serve burgers, but and one of them.
My daughter works at White Spot too. Yeah. Jeez.
And the other one's already permitted in that zone.
Thank you, Mayor.
I do want to accentuate that top paragraph on page 10. I think it is the most important paragraph, and I thank Mr. McIntyre for the comments, because I'm the vice chair of the political version of the same committee, the Regional Planning Committee, and it is an argument now about how much control, how many of these decisions will be made in Burnaby. When this gets adopted, we may not be able to decide that even though the businesses, the industrial applications down in that area of Coquitlam really want the services. They need those services like restaurants and like retail to support their business. And we haven't been able to put them in. This will permit us to, but under the regional growth strategy, as some people view it, we wouldn't be allowed to. Those decisions would have to be made by people who were elected in Tsawwassen and elected in Langley and various other places around the region. We have to be really careful about making sure that the laudable efforts at regional planning don't result in some really unintended consequences that shackle city councils across the region in trying to respond to the really local needs of their communities. And this one, it's true, I think. If we were trying to do this a year from now, it would all depend on the wording that they ended up coming up with as to whether or not we would be allowed to make these really important adjustments to our industrial lands, really important adjustments that will make our industrial lands work better, make them employ more people, make them be more supportive of the goals of this community. So I'm absolutely in favor of this, and I'm glad we're getting to it right now.
Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you. Well, I'm in favor of anything that streamlines all our big, long, bureaucratic policies. We've talked about this before, and I know probably in the minority on this one, but I still think industrial, just the word industrial is outdated and outmoded, because it brings up pictures of a bygone era of big industry and things like that. That's just not going to, big dirty industry that's just not going to be down there anymore. The mixed use areas, the job creation, all that. I wished we were more focused on with that kind of a name. I'm going to add my voice too to the restaurants. There are a lot of people that work down there. I think that by us saying, no, you're only good enough for fast food restaurants, if there's a demand down there for better restaurants, I just think that's wrong. And we do have an area down there that is cut in half by the freeway and the highway, and so there is a distinct back and forth, and it is difficult to get to go out for a meal break or even for any kind of amenities down there. There's a lot of people working down there, and I think that we're not doing them any favors by making them have to leave that area just for a meal or just to put some gas in the car or buy a pack of gum. I'm also against encouraging recreation facilities down in that area. Big trucks, heavy machinery, don't mix with people bringing kids down or people that have a different intention or different thought pattern going down, not thinking about the area down there. They're just focusing on going down to play their sport. I think that a case-by-case basis looking at that is acceptable, but I don't think we should be encouraging that. There's my 2 cents.
Okay, so we had a mover and a secondary for as it's written. I don't think there's anything here that we need to change much, except to say that we have given direction today, I believe, and I think you can follow up, and as I say, I'll be delighted to work with you on this assessment thing, because that really fascinates me, and then bring it back as soon as possible. So if we come back in September, that's good, because it's a good time to be going out to the public. So you're happy with that?
I am.
Okay. All in favor, opposed, carried. We're moving on. Number 3, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Number 3 is a preliminary report on applications for a citywide official community plan amendment bylaw 4134 and zoning amendment bylaw 4135. Relates to properties on Gislason Avenue. The 3 recommendations are that Council give first reading to bylaw 4134, first reading to bylaw 4135, and that these bylaws and their related applications be referred to public hearing, noting that staff are non-supportive of the proposed OCP amendment and rezoning in parcel SC 11. The proponent is here and would like to speak to this item, if that is the committee's wish.
Okay, so I believe there's going to be a lot of discussion on this one. So can we allow debate and everything without having?
Sure, if the committee would like to have it on the floor, noting that they'd like to hear those comments first.
We've made an executive decision here.
It is the committee, yeah.
Mr. McIntyre, did you want to speak first? Or Mr. Erst is going to speak from Westfield, or?
Mr. Raymond Nosting.
Raymond, do you want to come forward then, please? Jim isn't jumping to the fore, so when he doesn't jump, then he loses.
That's fine. If Mr. Nosting, I know he wanted to speak to this. Staff was going to provide an overview, but we can do that, and it would certainly answer your questions after.
Oh, we have a prince in our forest.
Oh, look at that.
Thank you very much. For the record, Raymond Ostine with Westfield Holdings, 2650 666 Burrard, no longer 1450 Johnson Street in Coquitlam.
I know.
We are building a new office for ourselves here, though, so just stay tuned. Thank you very much for this opportunity to come up here. It's the application before committee today, and hopefully moving forward to council. And we'll get right to the crux of the issue here, and that is Westfield is applying to triple the density on these sites. We might as well say there's an elephant in the room and get right to that. This is the most pressing issue that council will be debating with this, as well as some of the minor ones. And given the current political sensitivity to this issue right now, in terms of housing mix and housing targets, I'm not really sure we could have picked a worse time to come in front of you. However, because of the unique circumstances of these sites, Westfield strongly believes that townhouses are in fact the most appropriate form of housing for these 3 constrained parcels. And Westfield has been involved on Burke Mountain from, for the last 10 years. I can't say day one, of course, because that was a little longer than 10 years ago. But we've been involved for a very long time. We sat on all of the neighborhood planning groups and committees that came up with these neighborhood plans. I sat on the Smiling Creek one myself. And so it's with the knowledge of what has happened in the past with the community, working with the councils, and under today's awareness of this issue, we don't come to this podium and to this council lightly with this request. But we honestly believe it is the best solution. One thing you'll hear about today, and I wanted to start off with motherhood and apple pie, or red-legged frogs. We do have red-legged frogs on Smiling Creek up there, and many of the solutions that we're proposing relate directly to not only the environment and the riparian areas in general, but the red-legged frog in specifically. Now, we'll see if I can figure out where I am here. So just as a bit of context, SC 11, 13, 16, Smiling Creek is SC, are these three parcels running through between the two Smiling Creeks, West Smiling Creek and Smiling Creek proper. And you can see the proximity of these sites within, and the highlighted area is a 5-minute walking radius, about 400 meters. And you can see the centrality of that site in terms of some future and very important community amenities. To the west, the future high school, major playing fields, and associated park space. To the east is the proposed middle school and community center, the city community center. So very centrally located to those, as well as bisecting through the site is David Avenue, major arterial, which will have transit on it, and through the middle is Burke Mountain Promenade leading to the future village core. So a very central site to this part of the neighborhood. To the west also, these two sites here, currently approved, zoned, and under construction by Polygon for similar type of development as we're proposing, RT2. And to the east, another, this will be in front of you today and council on Monday, assuming things move forward. And this is within the OCP, so it's a very minor modification there. But so you can see the proximity of other townhouse to the site itself. So here we have a bit of an illustration with some of the constraints that I'll be referring to with the site. Once again, we have West Smiling Creek running along the west side and Smiling Creek on the other side. So very definite barriers on the east and west side. The sites themselves are bisected by 4 major and minor roads, existing and future. At the top we have Gislason, which would be the extension of Gislason. David Avenue, which is built across and the 2 bridges in place already. We have Burke Promenade, same as David, built and in place. And we have, it's Galloway at the top and Gislason at the bottom. So not only do we have very distinct east and west edges to this, but then we have these very real borders of along the north and south edges of all of the properties in question. You'll also see that we've illustrated the excessive slopes through these narrow sites. Along the bottom, we're talking about anywhere from 12 to 15, 16% slope through there. Through the middle site, we're more in the 11 to 13%, and as we get up to the top site, more around of a consistent 11%. So we also have, as well as narrow sites, we have very severely sloping sites. So how does that affect our decision and why we believe that townhouse is a better solution than single family? In order to get municipal standard, well, we can't get municipal standard roads in or through these sites because of the excessive slope. So there's a good starting point. Strata roads, which have lesser criteria, narrower, you can go to steeper grades, we can get those in, but even that's going to be a challenge. So getting roads into these with these slopes is certainly a major starting point. Another point that I'll make in a couple of different ways throughout this presentation is about the environmental areas themselves. We believe that with the common governance of a strata-type development, that the environmental areas on the edges of this property will be better protected than in the privacy of single-family backyards. The reasons for that are that stratas have a strata council, which is in essence the 4th level of government. They are taking care of the properties as a whole through a set of bylaws and consistency. The environmental areas would then be more public in nature, as they would be outside of the developable areas. And as lastly, all stratas, or virtually all stratas, have got a professional gardening service. So when you have a line that delineates, you can work on this side but not that side, I believe there's more likelihood of consistency in the protection of that through that type of ownership and, if you will, gardening. This is an illustration of what the development might look like, and I stress the might part because we're here in front of you looking for a general zoning of the land. It would be up to whoever we sell these parcels to come forward with the actual architectural style and the situation utilizing the site for their type of market. But what this does illustrate are some of the principles that staff and we agree would like to put as a covenant on these properties, so when we sell them to the polygons of the world, that they understand what the rules are in purchasing this property. Some of that is you'll see that the building blocks tend to run with the grade east-west, and that what we're doing here, we'll start at the bottom, is you get a road in and then you build this pod of development, taking up the grade as much as you can through the road structure, through the basements, through the foundations of the homes. And then we have this green belt running through the middle, and this is an area where you can take that grade and start to split it with this common area. Then you come in from the top and do the same sort of pattern of this pod development, taking up the grade as you go. And if we go back to the previous slide, you can see this illustrated in a generalized way with this green band connecting through to the two creeks, this idea of some common open space, which would naturally occur as a way to take up this grade anyways. We go back to this diagram. You see we've colored the trees in a couple of different ways on the site. Those dark green ones, those are the wind firm trees. We have an obligation to protect the SPIA area, the riparian area, to make sure that the environmental setbacks are safe and such for the health of these creeks. In order to protect the trees within that area, in these particular sites, we need to go further out. And we need to protect what are known as wind firm trees, which then stand up and protect the rest of the rest inside the environmental area. So you can see this illustrated in the two shades of green on this. The darker green is what we would be required, what we are required to protect for the creeks, and we will be doing that, of course. And then the lighter green is the extra space. And what we are proposing there with this townhouse development, and those lighter greens are the polygons that hold those specific trees. What we're suggesting is we're actually going to fence along that line, and that lighter green space then becomes extra environmental area. It is protected, it is enhanced. And so this is more than what is required. Now, I say that very specifically for West Smiling Creek. This is where we get to the frogs. Smiling Creek itself is documented to have red-legged frogs. They are a blue-listed species with provincial protection. There are no hard and fast rules as to if you find a frog, it's 5 meters, and if you find 2 frogs, it's 7 meters. It's what's known as best practices. With these wind-firm trees and the additional protection, this then would be additional habitat for the red-legged frogs, which would certainly satisfy the requirements of those best practices. So we will be protecting on Smiling Creek with the fencing and covenants that area, not only as greens as environmental, but specifically about the red-legged frog. On West Smiling Creek, for the townhouse proposal, we are suggesting the same. There is no presence of frog there, but we would treat it the same and add that extra space in with fencing, covenants, and protection. The next part of this is the recommendation from staff on there is not support for SC11, but there is support for 13 and 16. We've had some great discussions about that. I understand the points that staff are making with that. I think that there's certainly there's a lot of validity to it. I would describe SC16 in terms of single family as near impossible. I would say that SC13 is slightly better than near impossible, and SC11 is extremely difficult. Could we do single family there? Yes, we could. It would be an engineered solution. It is possible, but for the same reasons that we believe 13 and 16 should be townhouse, I believe that all of those arguments are just as valid for SC11, even though it is not quite as bad as the others. I'll stop at that point and make myself available for questions.
Okay, thank you. You want to go first? Sure. Councillor Robinson.
Well, thank you for the pictures. As Councillor Reid said, we love pictures. And this certainly is a difficult one because, I'm not a builder, I'm not a developer, but even I can appreciate the challenges that you have with grade. And I'm wanting to know, and the arguments for being close to school, and all the amenities, they're good arguments, which is why we already have high density on either side of that, closer to those amenities. And I wanting to know, does Westfield have other lands, developable lands that are in this area, in Smiling Creek, that are currently zoned for townhouse that you might consider zoning for single family?
I think the short answer is no. And the reason is that we look at each of these sites individually as they are and what it is, without sounding too esoteric, what the land tells us to do. So we do have another coming up, SC2, further north, that we are currently exploring in terms of our subdivision ability of that. But this isn't about, in our minds, it's not about a trade-off of this for that. It's that these sites, well, at the time of the planning committee or the planning group, there really was discussion about whether these should be RS9 or they should be townhouse. And there wasn't a clear conclusion other than what came down on paper, but it was more of, well, that's probably right. So we've come to council not to say that we need to double or triple density as a profit margin or anything like that. We've been invested in the land for a long time. And this is what these sites should be. And then all of the other sites that we will look at, the remainder in our holdings, will tell us what they should be as well.
So while I appreciate what the land tells you, you land whisperer, we're also thinking about what is the community going to look like. And so we're the community whisperers. And so need to be paying attention to what the overall makeup is. How are people living together? How are they working together? So I think we're all on the same page, but perhaps we're whispering to different kinds of pieces of information. Now, I noticed that later on this afternoon, you guys have been very busy. Mm-hmm. We're going to be hearing, I think it's item 5. I think it's your SC14.
Yeah, that's the site on the eastern side of this diagram.
Right. Now, it's also an 11% grade. Mm-hmm. And so if you, and that's a single family.
No, it's townhouse.
It's townhouse that you're doing there.
The SC15 in the report, 15B in the report references 11% grade.
Right.
The difference there is the fact that that's a very shallow band, horizontal, fronting on to Gislason, doesn't have the internal servicing type of considerations. So it's yes, it's 11%, but it's 11% for one row of homes along a fronting street.
That was the question I had. That was all I had right now. Thanks, Raymond.
Councillor Reamer.
Thank you very much. I actually was up there this morning. I walked the site. I thought that SC13 was actually steeper than SC16, but of course I was looking up at it and down at the other. So anyway, this is interesting to know. So I understand the difficulties with SC13 and SC16. Where I'm very torn is with SC11. And given our concerns and the public's concerns about density, what would be the difference then in the, if SC11 was to be a single family and compared to a townhouse? So what would the difference in the numbers be? I've done a quick calculation and I think I figure about 25.
Yeah, we're anticipating that SC11 for townhouse could accommodate about 50 units. These are always going to be plus or minus. For single family, it's probably that site. We've done some different configurations, maybe in the 12 to 20. So more of a 2 times type of factor. So you would, if you took it out of the townhouse, rather than a net difference of 100 units across Smiling Creek, which is what we're talking about, assuming all 3 is townhouse, you would that would come down to about 80, and also bring up your RS8. So it is statistically different, but similar.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's my only question.
Okay, my turn.
Oh, good.
hold on. Thank you for your really detailed explanation. However, I was around when the plateau was being developed, so I think you guys have seen these grades before. And like staff, I really think that the northern SC11 could be done into single family. On behalf of the rest of the population of Burke Mountain who do not want to see a mountain full of townhouses, it's really difficult to look at 3 times the density, and I understand why, and on behalf of all the little frogs, I thank you. But I would like to ask a question here. The zones that you've been given to work with are ones that you helped us evolve with over the years for Burke Mountain. What if we come to some kind of a compromise? And I mentioned this to staff this morning, and they're sort of nodding their heads in wonderment whether this would work or not. I wanted to see if we could put any kind of single family on these. And the way it was explained to me, and I can fully understand this, that to me it's not even a safe thing to do. It doesn't even make sense. To have the townhouses the way you can dig them in, and that makes much more sense. But instead of having the townhouses that we have now that are 3-level, 1,800 square feet, would it be possible for us to compromise for 13 and 16 on some large executive townhomes that would probably be a little wider, be a little more substantive than the townhouses that we're looking at? I'm trying to get a compromise here. Mm-hmm. Instead of going for 140 units, can we get it down to under 100 somewhere?
As I had stated earlier, we put an illustration up that shows approximately 150 units.
I see that.
And that's based on the unit types that are being sold now locally. There's 2 different sort of footprints. It's also based on, once again, what's happening here on the mountain, and those types of units that work on an uphill and on a downhill situation. It's illustrative. Westbuild is not saying that it will be 150 or has to be 150. What we're asking is that it is zoned for multifamily, and that at the time a builder comes in, that they would then work with staff through the DP process to react to the market of the day, to work with the realities of that site as they put in more detailed examination into what we have. So in principle, I would say yes, but I think that can be handled through the market rather than artificially saying that it can only accommodate either A, larger units, or B, a specific number.
The place I have difficulty with that is this is such a piece of property that, and I know you develop, you get a zoning on them, and then you sell them off to whomever is going to come along. This is something that if we give approval to, I want to see this be attached to the approval, so as a schedule, because I think it's really important that we have a covenant that protects what we are seeing and what our intent is. So for me to say today that I would rezone 13 and 16 as townhouse, like RT7 or whatever they're going to be, or what were they?
RT2.
RT2, sorry. I just find I can't do that. I'd like to, but I'd like to for all the reasons you've given, but I just think that we're just crowding one heck of a lot of townhouses in here, and it's not what the city envisioned, and more importantly, it's not what Burke Mountain residents envisioned. If we could come up with some kind of a compromise in between, which is where I tried to go with staff this morning, and perhaps Mr. McIntyre would comment on that. I'm trying to, if this strip, we're having townhouses on both sides, and I'm trying to find something in this 13 and 16 that we could do that would be more substantive, give a different look than be all great big townhouses. That's what I was working towards. So I'm just going to ask Mr. McIntyre to comment.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. If I can just get him to comment.
Same thing.
Very briefly, yes, it's an interesting approach, and I think I can certainly understand that we want to have a little comfort as to what we're rezoning to, and that was the idea behind the restrictive covenant, is to, well, for all parties, to have some comfort in what we're going to, some certainty. If direction back to staff, we can continue to work with the proponent. There may be portions of the site that might lend themselves to these executive townhomes. I certainly understand Westbuild's position and view of that, and some of the recent developments that Mr. Nosting was pointing to that Polygon has done, where you're getting into the narrower units in the 3-story form, built on sort of a shelf-like site. There may be areas here, perhaps those, for example, fronting along the roads, where narrower or wider, lower units might be more appropriate, like along the lines of the executive townhouse you're thinking of. So maybe it's kind of a little bit of a mix and match scenario. So that's something we could take away and continue working with the proponents on that.
Okay. Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you. My concern for this is that we're putting so many townhouses up here now, it's turning into Townhouse Mountain. And when, just for the slope on these properties here, when you talk about, Mr. Nostine, about putting in strata roads, they're quite a bit narrow, and I get concerned for the winter conditions up there, icy, snowy. You're putting that many people on really narrow roads. That's a concern to me. So I'd have to hear some sort of different means of road work up there than strata roads.
It's certainly not unusual. I mean, on the plateau and already at Burke. One thing about strata is that on my strata fees, I know that part of it goes to our snow removal every year. We have a private contractor who comes in and deals with it, versus the city having to get into these very extreme roads, if they were public, and having to plow them. So I would argue that in most cases of stratas, especially if you've got it steep and you've got to get it done, it becomes an important issue for that strata. And I would suggest that they would probably be done with more frequency and better than if it was done by the municipal force.
Ooh, I find that hard to believe.
Me too.
Sorry.
And I see what you're saying. It's a substantial bit of road work, though. It's not just a small little piece, and it's a concern of mine. So there we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Stewart.
Thank you very much. The reason I was late this afternoon, actually, was I was up there getting my shoes dirty walking this site as well. And I wish you could clean it a little bit, because it's got mud in it and everything. And I recognize the challenges, and I've seen sites like that, and I've seen, in fact, some of the challenges that you spoke about. The part that convinced me perhaps the most on the positive side is the snow removal. We have places in a development that you are familiar with, Westwood Plateau, where the neighbors were very complaining to the city about the fact that they couldn't get out because the roadway is too steep, and I recognize the challenges, certainly on 13 and 16, of trying to build local roads in any of those, and I would see the same kinds of challenges, to a much lesser extent, granted, on SC11. I'm still challenged, and in fact, this is such a unique piece of property between the two creeks that it presents unique opportunities and really unique challenges. And if it had been presented to us today as always having been townhouses, we wouldn't be arguing at all, because it lends itself perfectly naturally to townhouses. I think the challenge we've got is the perception, as Councillor McDonnell said, is that we're switching too much. We're only seem to be going in one direction. No one's applying to take townhouse sites and make them single family. So we're left with that. And I'm sympathetic to the challenge you're facing. I actually get a vote on this committee. I'm not going to exercise it today on this one, although I suspect I know where it's going. I'm troubled with this because these folks, the three members of this committee, are challenged with the task of making that an excellent mountain, an excellent development, and responding to all of the neighbors, all of the people that have been involved in this planning process. as well as responding to the staff who work really hard to make recommendations to committee. So I didn't have any questions for you.
We don't kid ourselves. I mean, we know this is a real issue. And so it's good to have this opportunity a bit more informally to start that debate with committee. We believe we do believe it's the right answer. We've held this land for 10 years. We didn't buy zoned single-family land 1 year ago or 6 months ago and asked to have it rezoned for the purpose of density. What we've done is we've brought to the table what we believe is the correct solution for this unique parcel. If I could, sort of as a closing comment, in terms of Councillor Reid's question from a couple of meetings ago, what's the wow? What makes this different than other applications? Why should we consider this differently than other applications? Other than the reasons that we've already pointed out about the site itself, there is one other part, and that is that what Westbuild is prepared to do, not only with the additional green spaces and the protection of those over and above what would need to be done as a minimum, but secondly, the creek lands themselves on East and West Smiling Creek and the hydro corridor where the OCP shows a public park, those are lands that the city needs and is required to purchase from Westbuild to put them into the park system. With this application, and not as a condition of what staff have asked us, but as a understanding of the complexities of this site, Westbuild is offering, it's about 5 acres of land at no charge to the city as part of this application.
I do, if I could.
Thank you. Oh.
If I could just, one more comment, because I do want to applaud that one, your opening statement just a minute ago, which was that you confronted it right up the, I do get troubled by people who buy single-family land and say, I can make a killing because I can convince council to change it, even though what I bought, I knew what I was buying. This land has been in your hands, and you up front, right at the beginning of the meeting today, said, this is a big change. You didn't try to minimize it. And so I do appreciate that. Council, these are intelligent people. And so I appreciate you for coming forward and confronting the elephant in the room. Thanks.
Come fall, I have a whole bunch of single-family applications for your consideration.
We'll argue about them. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're sort of at some sort of an impasse here. I was trying to come up with some kind of a compromise. You have 2 members of the committee that think SC11 should remain, I think, as staff says, in single family. The other 2, I'm willing to work with you on townhouses, but I'm willing to work with an executive townhouse that isn't in the zoning that you're contemplating. And I know you're building 2 little houses at the very bottom there, and that's fine. It's not in this application anyhow. And Councillor Reamer, you are where?
Well, I'm supportive of the townhouses in SC13, SC16. I think for reasons of continuity and the fact that there's a single family to the west of SC11, I think I would prefer SC11 stay
Single family.
Single family.
Okay, Mr. McIntyre. There we are. This was there urgency that this get through to the July public hearing?
Oh, I can answer that one.
Madam Chair, yes. Staff have, again, working quite closely with Ray and his team, facilitated to bring this forward. The target is today's Land Use Committee, next Monday's council meeting, assuming support.
I understand the timeline, so there was urgency.
And if I could as well, if with the committee's direction, we can go back and continue working with Ray and his team and look at some of the tweaking around the site, the executive townhouse concept, maybe on some of the road frontages may be more appropriate there, and give us that time to work on it, and we'll come back to a public hearing, assuming the council support it moving forward next Monday. So I guess then if we move this forward knowing that 2 of us at least are not in favor of the townhouses. You've presented it, so, and also knowing that staff aren't supportive of this amendment.
we move it forward to public hearing for you, will you work with staff to perhaps see if we can't come to some compromise on the type of townhouses that you're looking at?
Absolutely.
Into a larger unit, something very executive, very lovely, bigger, less units.
Yeah, we have the opportunity between now and public hearing to have some good discussions and see, I mean, rather than be forced into a decision today, I think that it would be better
and I
if we
understand,
had
and
that
I'm trying,
discussion.
you have been great developers in our city, and your participation in our city is welcome by all. And we thank you for your diligence. I do not want to turn this down because then it prohibits you from being at public hearing. But I do want to caution you that for myself alone, moving this forward with the direction that I've given staff is what I want to see. If it doesn't get that way, I don't think I can support it. So, Councillor Reamer?
Sorry, I just have a question with respect to SC11. So
Go ahead.
what are your thoughts with respect to SC11?
I want to see it as single family. I think all three of us have decided that. So 3 women want to see something done. I think you've had it. Yeah.
Be very afraid.
Be very
And
that's why I'm staying out of that one.
All kidding aside, I think all 3 of us are there. And I think on the 13 and 16, I just think the unit count is way too high. And I think if we can get something that looks different, and we've got some townhouses in the other parts of Coquitlam that look more substantive, more like a single-family house, and I think we can work something there. So, Mr. Gilbert, if we move forward with these recommendations, that's okay? And staff, you have all the direction you need?
Thank you.
Okay. So I have a mover? A second?
Second.
All in favor, opposed, carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item, item 4, is a preliminary report on applications for an official community plan amendment bylaw 4132 and a zoning amendment bylaw 4133. This relates to 1450 Johnson Street. The staff recommendations that council give first readings to bylaws 4132 and 4133, and that these 2 bylaws and the related applications be referred to public hearing.
Do I have a
I'll
mover?
move them.
I'll second for discussion. Okay, I'll start discussion. The only way I will look at this is if you put a median down the middle of the road that can't be crossed. And so who wants to speak to that? Oh, Mr. Nostine, please come forward. And you're not even going to build it, are you? Is it already in?
Yeah.
But you're talking about the daycare and the need for a median?
I have 2 questions only on this. I want to make sure that there's a median so that there can't be any left turn out of your driveway or of your old driveway. I'll just wait here. Okay, and I don't know what else to do. It's just the traffic is, I've had so many phone calls on this from people.
Yeah, and we fully understand that. To answer your question, we fully believe a median is not necessary in the least. What we have here now that was we just received on Friday afternoon,
Okay, so we don't have the traffic study?
giving it to the clerk and staff. But
Okay.
what this traffic study clearly shows is that at peak, there will be an additional of less than 1 car per minute added into the existing situation. The daycare operates from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., I believe is, and during that time, drop-offs and pickups happen throughout the day. They happen largely outside of the peak of the school. So the complaints about the traffic, the parking, et cetera, which, trust me, we know very well, having operated out of that location for a number of years,
Okay.
really is about 15 minutes a day, twice a day. The issue...
What about the outside play area? That's my second point.
Okay. The issue about the yellow line and turning left against a double yellow line, it is not illegal. It is perfectly legal as long as you are not impeding traffic in other directions. Given the width of Johnson at that place, all of those traffic movements can happen unimpeded. So we really believe that traffic is a non-starter but obviously a very real concern for everyone who's there and for the reasons of the peak periods with the school. To back us up, rather than just our opinion, we now have a report which I'll be submitting to staff and then you'll be receiving. The outdoor play area, absolutely it is going to be required. We are working with the applicant and we will be helping contribute to that. And so those are one of the many issues that Fraser Health Board and the different agencies will require for the build out of this daycare.
How many little darlings are you going to have in there?
If I could, I can ask Carol Weens of Bright Star Academy to come down and answer some of the operational questions.
Okay. Your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Carol Weens, and do you want residential address?
Sure.
1551 Celeste Crescent, Port Coquitlam.
Thank you.
And I'm the director of a daycare in Port Coquitlam, across from Terry Fox. It is the same size as the one that's proposed here on Johnson Avenue. It's about 5,000 square feet. We're licensed there for about 75 children, and this facility will have about the same number of children.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. Well, I fully support having a daycare, especially near to Panorama Elementary School. However, I do have a few questions. So you've got 75 children, and you're open from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m.
That's correct.
So how many kids do you have dropped off then at your peak period, and when is your peak period?
Well, because it's daycare, there is really a fluid drop-off and pick-up time, because not all parents go to work at the same time. So it does start to trickle in at 7, and it's usually from 7 till about 9:30 is what we observe in terms of parents dropping their children off, and pickup can start as early as about 3:30 to 6.
Okay. So the reason I asked when your peak period is because part of the concern of residents, of course, is that it's going to really congest the traffic, the school traffic that's already badly congested. So that's why I was asking if the majority of your parents are dropping kids off at 8 a.m., that's what I would like to know.
No. I think there's a misconception, because with schools, the school starts at 8:30 and everybody has to be there for 8:30, and then everybody leaves at 3. But with daycare,
the school start at 8:30?
Well, whatever. That was just an example.
Okay.
Say school starts at 9 or whatever it is. And that's where people have this misconception that daycare operates the same way, but it doesn't. People just trickle in and they trickle out, and they don't stay very long. That's another concern, too. They think that parents are going to come in and, I don't know, but they got to go to work. So they come in, they drop off their bags, they hand over their child, they give them a hug goodbye, and they go. I think they're in there for less than a minute usually.
Okay.
So it's very, very fast.
Right. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. As a parent who used daycare, your characterization is bang on, because you don't have time. You have to get home to make dinner. You can't sit and chit-chat. I guess I'm wanting to know a little bit about, with 75 kids, and I'm also the traffic concerned a little bit about that. Would you say that most of your kids are there before 9? I'm just trying to get a sense of if you can tell me that 80% of our kids are already there before 9, then that at least gives me a bit of numbers.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how many of your kids?
The traffic study.
That is helpful. Okay, so I'll see if Raymond can pull up the graph, but I mean the configuration of this facility, I think, is similar to what we have, and we just really don't see any of this traffic congestion that everybody's envisioning. If you're familiar with Terry Fox Secondary on Riverwood Gate, that's another terrible place for cars. All the teens there, they all take a car to school, and everybody was envisioning the worst. and it just didn't happen.
And it's the same thing at Ranch Park Elementary. They have an on-site daycare, and it's right on site of the elementary school. And it is crazy with congestion, but really, when you take a look about what's going on at the daycare, it's the elementary school that's creating the congestion. It's not the daycare.
Yes.
So I witness that every day because I look right out onto the facility. So I'm just looking for this chart. Thank you.
What was great about this traffic study was not only did it talk about theoreticals and standard movements and theoretical and standard sorts of movements, but what we commissioned Bunt to do was go and observe the existing daycare that is run very similar to this one, similar size, next to a school, and they were there for a week harassing parents. They were there counting cars. They were looking at frequencies of stop. They were looking at duration of time in and out. And so the information in here, when I say it would contribute to less than 1 car per minute at peak times, isn't a theoretical. It is a statistically factual observation of their current situation. So this, when you have this report, you can go at the graphs and.
Thank you. For me, this is exactly what I needed. So thank you very much, and I'm completely going to support it. I do have a question about concerns that folks have had about commercialization of the area. We've been getting a lot of emails and letters and concerns, and I just want to, I guess, hear a bit more about, is that really possible given, if it changes to P4 special care institutional, that it's a very limited use, and I just want to make sure that I understand this correctly.
Madam Chair, if I could, that's correct. Staff are supporting this application, subject to having everything proven out with the traffic study. So we'll see that and be able to report back on that shortly. In terms of the use, it's limited pretty much to what's in the P4 zone. I do know that stretch of road personally. I drive down there frequently, and there's many traffic jams every morning, every afternoon around Panorama Elementary. The site is across the street. I think this site does benefit, though, in having its separate driveway and a turnaround on site and room for drop-off and pickup, which some other daycares don't often benefit from. The other thing I would note as an area resident, by way of precedent, the Bramblewood Elementary School, a little further up the hill on Panorama, there's a Montessori daycare where my kids went to, and it's a busy, popular place, and it seems to function with Bramblewood Elementary right across the street. So there is precedent in the area. It's not commercialization. I think it provides a needed service to the residents.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I think that as we move forward as a community, we talk about live, work, play. There's nothing better, I think, than having daycare right across the street or right on the property of an elementary school. So I'm fully supportive.
Councillor Reamer.
I agree completely with what Councillor Robinson said. With respect to the public hearing notification, and I noticed the notification that's already been sent out, will we be informing people of the daycare hours so that they are aware that parents may not be dropping their kids off there right during school hours, but rather through extended hours? Is there any way to indicate that on the public hearing notification?
I think it's a very good question. Now, firstly, the hearing notices haven't gone out because that would not be till next Monday after Council considers this matter. So we can talk with the Clerk's Department. Perhaps Jay would want to comment on that. We try to give general overview information in the notice rather than loading up with too much detail, but also directing people to call either the clerks or the planning department for further information. So we can make sure the staff have that information at hand, but we can take it away and discuss it with clerk staff.
The other thing is, having been up to the Westfield office on many occasions, I'm wondering if a lot of those neighbors at 2979 Panorama and 2990 Panorama are aware of the great facility that there is for drop-off, in that you're going up the long driveway and then around the roundabout. It's almost, it would be nice if some of those residents could have a tour so that they could actually see it. And So that was just a thought I had. Thank you.
What Westfield will be doing is, with all of the letters that council has received with the early notification, we've already drafted replies to all of those letters. We're just finalizing them now. So we want to stay. We want to stay in contact with any neighbor that has a direct concern. So we've answered. It's not a form letter. We've answered each of the specific questions for that person, and we've also said that Carol or myself is available to them at any time for further discussion or a site tour. So we're working as proactively as we can with our neighbors, because we believe once they understand, intuitively, I understand where this is coming from. You think it's going to be something that's bad now and become worse. The reality is it's not. So we want to help our neighbors understand that.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Mr. Gilbert, is there any way to regulate hours?
Regulate hours of the daycare? Well, I think we have, I'd have to probably hand that off to Jim's group more specifically, but I think we've done so in the past through certain restrictive covenants on other businesses.
Yeah, I thought that was your bailiwick, that's why I was asking.
Yes, Madam Chair, we can regulate hours of use through a restrictive covenant. We have done it previously.
And secondly, back to you, Erica, then P4 special care institutional. If for some reason we have no little darlings needing daycare, and it becomes vacant, what else could it be used for?
P4 special care institutional is limited to principal use as assembly, which is limited to child minding services, nursery schools, kindergartens, daycare centers, and other school daycare centers. So pretty much that's the use
pretty much that's it.
For that
Okay.
zone.
Thank you. Did we have a recommendation? Did we have it seconded?
Yeah, you moved. I seconded.
All in favor?
Yeah.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 5 is a preliminary report on applications for official community plan amendment bylaw 4136 and zoning amendment bylaw 4137. This relates to 1399 David Avenue. The staff recommendation is that council give first readings to bylaws 4136 and 4137, and that these two bylaws and their related applications be referred to public hearing. The proponent is available to speak to the item as well.
I know, we even know who he is.
Been busy. I was just going to move it.
So move.
And second,
Do you have a question?
well, it's a tongue-in-cheek question, but I'll pass.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just curious if maybe we can entice you into maybe making this, RS 7, 8?
I think the answer is no.
Thought I'd try.
It's moved, seconded, all in favor, opposed, carried. Next item.
Next item, item 6, is a preliminary report on applications for zoning amendment bylaw 4123 and 5% park dedication provisions for a proposed subdivision at 3455, 3465 Roxton, and 3445 Gislason Avenues. The staff recommendation is to give first reading to zoning amendment bylaw 4123. That bylaw 4123 and its application be referred to public hearing, and that in accordance with 941 of the Local Government Act, the owner provides 5% land.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, opposed, carried. Item 7.
Item 7 is consideration of fourth and final reading of zoning amendment bylaw 3987, and it's an authorization for the issuance of a development permit for a mixed-use high-density development at 580, 584, and 590 Clarke Road. The staff recommendation is to give fourth and final reading to bylaw 3987, and that the development permit be authorized for signing and sealing.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have
I have a few questions.
a couple of questions, and one of them is probably, I've lost it. Aha. The traffic, or the parking. I had concerns about the parking, and after Erica, Jim, and I going around the mulberry bush a few times, we came up with, we thought was a rather ingenious solution. And it would be to where our bylaw requires 441 spaces, and they're going to give us 405, but the visitor is half, even though it is a transit-oriented development, and I'm in full understanding of that. The problem is when you have visitors, and there's going to be 330 some units, everyone might have a visitor now and then, and if they're all parking down in the commercial area, somebody's going to start ticketing like they do at Lougheed Mall or towing, because it's going to also be a transit stop, so they won't want people coming, parking, and then hopping on the SkyTrain. So I have Two things to say about this. I love the development, absolutely love it. I just have a little concern if we can play with the numbers, and I believe Mr. McIntyre has already spoken to the proponent. I'd like to add that we also have, with this development, $540,000 contribution to public amenity spaces around that development from the developer, which is a nice bonus for the Coquitlam area. And it could be used in the little park, which, of course, as we all know, when Emerson gets completed, it will go through to Smith. There will be a bit of a land exchange between Moorgard and ourselves for the park, but it should be fairly well even. It might be a little sliver that isn't. But we have this $540,000 as a park amenity dollars, and that can go to Parks and Leisure to decide what they would like to do with the park space. So I think this is going to be a really beautiful corner of the world. I would like to add on that we give fourth and final reading, and secondly, we add on to the second recommendation that we were going to hold the second recommendation. Is that it? Or add this on, Mr. McIntyre? I think adding on until redesignation of parking is resolved. So we can move it all with that add-on.
Certainly, Madam Chair. We do have a week here between committee's consideration today and then on to council next Monday. I did have a brief word with the applicant's representative. Mr. Nusler is actually here, and if there's any questions, I'm sure he'd be pleased to come and speak with the committee. Let us take it away. Eric and I and the file manager, Michael Dhaliwal, can talk with them and see if we can come up with that arrangement. It was discussed in terms of how to sort of juggle the parking, and we could then report back. It might just be verbally, but we could report back next Monday at council just to confirm that that's been in place and agreed to, and hopefully
then we could withhold fourth reading if we don't get our resolution.
Making it subject to staff reporting back with that arrangement in hand.
Okay. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I had the same concern as Councillor Reid, so that one has been dealt with. You mentioned in the report that you'll be doing a traffic safety and operation audit 1 year after the opening of the Safeway store. And my question to you is, does the opening of the Safeway store coincide with the Evergreen, or what is the timing of that?
To the Chair, I believe that that request, which came through Transportation Services, is wanting to assess the conditions of the right-in, right-out off of Como Lake after there's been some time for the facility to operate, and to determine if there's really any safety issues with regard to vehicle collisions and whatnot that are resulting as a result of the presence of that right-in and right-out on Como Lake Avenue.
Right, and the reason I'm asking the question is I'm just wondering whether what the timing is of the completion of the Safeway store compared to the timing of the Evergreen.
No relationship.
No relationship at all. Okay.
Let's hope not.
Thank
we'll
you.
Be hungry. Yeah. Councillor Robinson. No. Okay.
Yes.
Move. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 8 relates to 3030 Gordon Avenue. It's the official community plan zoning bylaw amendment. It's a public consultation strategy. The staff recommendation is the council receive the report for information that the public consultation strategy proposed be endorsed, and that staff be authorized to send this report to the cities of Port Coquitlam and Port Moody.
And Mr. McIntyre suggested that we move this to tonight's meeting with your permission so that we can hurry it along. So that would be number 5, just to move it to strategic priorities. That wasn't my idea.
Okay.
If I could, Madam Chair, I think there is interest among some council members to help expedite this,
yes.
Get it onto council. The next council meeting is next Monday, of course. I think it was interesting getting these letters out this week before we get into July, and so we appreciate that. So the suggestion is, and I'm sorry, Jay, I didn't get a chance to chat with you before the meeting, if the committee wants to recommend it on to strategic priorities tonight, these all councils there. And if council is comfortable with that, then staff can take that direction and get the correspondence out.
Get the letters out. Okay, thank you. Councillor Reamer?
Well, my question, I had a couple of questions with respect to pre-meetings with key stakeholders. Do nonprofits include our service organizations?
Excuse me, yes, it does.
It does. Okay, that's great. And the other question I have was, it says opportunities for meetings as needed through the summer, and I always wonder about summer being the best time to create for public consultation. So I'm wary of the fact that we want to move this along quickly, but I also just want to say that I'm not sure summer's the best time. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I've been working closely with the Tri-Cities Homelessness Task Group, and I think the task group would agree with you that summertime for consultation is less than ideal. I think my understanding of the meetings with key stakeholders through the summer is as people have questions that the group would be available, there would be hold meetings for those particular groups, but that the consultation, the broader consultation, wouldn't happen until the fall. Okay. So I think it's just about how do you, as people have questions, that there will be some availability to address them as they come up, but that proper consultation in the fall.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so with the acknowledgement that number 4 would be to move this on to strategic priorities tonight. Yep. All in favor? Yep. Opposed? Carried. Item 9.
Item 9 concerns proposed solar hot water ready regulation. There's a series of 3 staff recommendations. I won't read all of the text, but they're before you now.
Okay. I'll move it.
I'll second.
And I agree with staff. We want to see what happens somewhere else before we try it. So all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item.
Next item, item 10, relates to actions addressing Goal 3 of the City of Coquitlam Economic Action Plan, building our cultural diversity, create trade and investment opportunities. The recommendation is that Council approve the following 4 actions: cultural business community engagement, messaging to attract investment, engagement with businesses and educational institutions, and continuing engagement of regional approaches to attracting foreign direct investment in order to address Goal 3 of the Economic Action Plan.
So moved.
I'll second it because I really want to see Council have a really full and rich discussion about this. You know, I would, I mean, I have some questions, but I really want to hear, I want everyone at the table in dialogue, so I'll move it so that we can move it on to Council discussion.
Okay. My comment is at this time, I need to see some numbers and figures about what's come out of what we've done so far and all the money that we've spent so far. And a lot of it hasn't been ours, it's been the province's. But I am not at all in favor of council members or staff traipsing off to Korea or China at this point in time. I think we have a lot more important things to be doing. And I just think it's just not the time to be doing this. So if we're going to move this forward, I don't know if I want to approve the following actions. So because one of those is an action, and I think what I'd rather do is just move this without recommendation onto full council for discussion.
Better.
So I can't move that, so you're going to have to. Will you second it?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. It's going on to full council without recommendation for discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 11 concerns the minutes of the Maillardville Commercial and Cultural Revitalization Task Force and their meeting of Thursday, June 3rd. The recommendations to receive those minutes.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. There's 2 items coming out.
Yes, there are. The first one concerns the terms of reference of the task force. The task force has asked that Council amend the terms of reference as followed, and it's a revision to the mandate statement that is before you in the 3 bullets.
I think that could be referred on to council for discussion.
Yeah.
So move.
Move it.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item.
The second item concerns parks and open spaces. The task force has asked that staff be directed to provide a strategic review of all lots in the neighborhood for city use in an effort to facilitate revitalization, that the city look into the purchase of property adjacent to Place Maillardville, and 3, that the city examine the adequacy of park standards as part of the neighborhood plan's long-term park and open space needs.
Okay, I would like to mention that all this work is underway right now. I confirmed that with the with Mr. McIntyre, but also I think our recommendation should be refer this back to staff and also refer it on to Leisure and Parks. So those would be the two correct recommendations, to refer it back to staff and refer it on to Leisure and Parks.
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor, opposed, carried. Next item.
That is the last formal agenda item for this meeting.
Perfect. Move for adjournment?
So moved. Second.
What a committee.
What a long meeting.
We are done. Thank you.